welcome to this first webcast of the ICA, the International Crime Prevention through Environmental Design Association, sponsored by the Septet United States, our provisional chapter. The ICA is a professional, non-profit, global organization for all things related to Septet. This webcast is one of many programs run by the ICA for preventing crime and creating safer places. My name is Pamela, and I'm Executive Director at the ICA. So before we start, I invite you to take advantage of many programs we offer by joining the ICA. You can use the link provided on the screen or contact us if you have any other questions regarding membership and the benefits. Also, before we start, a brief disclaimer that the views expressed in this presentation belong to our guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ICA. The ICA does not assume legal responsibility for the speaker's statements, the intellectual property, or the information presented today. Okay, let's begin with today's webcast. I'm excited to welcome all of you, our attendees and our panelists. We have with us Gregory Saville, Pamela Daniels, Jeremy Rear, Dr. Randy Atlas, Rene Berndt, Patrick McCully, and Chris Anquist. I will now hand over to our president, Dr. Macarena Rao, to say a few words and welcome our panelists. Okay, over to you, Macarena.
Thank you, dear Matella. I'm very happy to be here and to introduce this incredible ICA USA webcast. As you mentioned, I am Dr. Macarena Rao, the president of the International Septet Association, and I am very pleased to present today this incredible new group from the ICA forming chapter, the ICA USA chapter, but with the ICA co-founders. Of course, there is Greg Saville and other very, very relevant ICA experts since 1996. So you can imagine the amount of knowledge and wisdom they have regarding Septet first, second, and third generation. Today, they will talk about a super relevant topic, not only for the United States, for all the planet. We will talk about extremism and Septet from the 3D and 3C. So, Greg, back to you and much success with this webcast.
Thank you, Maca, and to you, Mateo, our stalwart leaders, for the introduction. And welcome everyone to this first webcast. We have done a webinar last year. In June of last year, we did June 3rd, we did a community engagement through Septet in times of uncertainty as a new provisional chapter. And today we're going to do a webcast. The webcast is not a webinar. It's a bit different. It's not a training. It's a dialogue and a discussion. So it's much more informal. We probably won't use PowerPoints. I think maybe I have one and Randy has one, but we're going to keep them very short, 10, 15 seconds maximum. And we want discussion and dialogue. Put your questions in the Q&A. We're going to, I'll moderate the session and introduce the guests. With comments by each person speaking, I'll probably keep it to about 1 to 2 minutes so that everybody gets a chance to speak. And we're going to break this into two parts. The first part will address the 3 questions which you've seen on the poster, and then for the second part, we'll have Q&As in there. And the second part, we'll have specific questions to each speaker. So that's kind of our goal. I will tell you that we are introducing a new concept today in this topic on extremism, Septet, called the 3 Cs. And I'll share my screen here with you and show you what we mean by that. Because it's a little bit different to what you're used to, I think, in Septet. So what you have on your screen here is what we call the three Cs. And you may, if you know Septet, I don't know how many of you are trained, but if you get a basic training in Septet, you'll learn about something called the 3 Ds, which came out of the 1980s, which has to do with reducing crime opportunities using designated spaces, defining spaces, and designing accordingly. Now that's been around for almost 40 years now. It's fine as a design strategy, but really as a way to respond to the modern environment with new issues and challenges we have, such as extremism, it's sorely inadequate. So what we've done in our preparation for this, the speakers will talk to you about what we call the 3 Cs. And by the 3 Cs, we call them communication, cohesion, and connections. Communication between people and among communities, cohesion within the community, and connections with outside. So that's kind of where we plan to go with this. We have a definition for extremism, and we'll give that to you now. because we had a lot of discussions about what is and what is not extremism. We kind of ended up with this general definition, although there are many. Extremism is a tendency to go to extremist positions within a doctrine or a practice. It's a political, religious, or economic ideology lacking compromise far outside the mainstream view. Some of our speakers will have some thoughts on that. And finally, extremist views often lead to violence, and they do violate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So that's the definition of extremism that we are going to use. Somebody asked, are you going to get copies of this? Yes, we can make copies of this to you as we get into this. All right, so that's where we're going with this. So having said that, a bit about the ICA USA, United States chapter we formed last year. We are affiliated with the International Septet Association, in the process of becoming a full chapter. We are a nonprofit, we're a professional organization, and we provide an authoritative voice by people who've been in the field for many, many years and from many, many disciplines. We bring all the resources of the International Septet Association to our chapter, our provisional chapter. We have certification, course accreditation, all the things you get through the ICA, like training webinars, white papers on positions such as homelessness, a new guidebook such as the school Septet guidebook about to be released this month, Septet bibliography, conferences that are both international and regional, and a newsletter. And we're announcing today the creation or the renewal of the ICA Septet Journal, which will be published for the first time in about 15 years. This fall. We're looking for folks who want to submit to the journal articles, peer-reviewed articles, scientific articles to us, because we'd love to publish those for you. Okay, so having said that, let's introduce our speakers, and let me just go around here, and I'll ask them to turn on their cameras when I go around. Let me start with Patrick McCully. Patrick, are you there?
I am. Good morning, and howdy to everybody from the great state of Texas. I'm listed as a police commander, but I've been a police officer for 28 years. I spent the last 10 as a captain, and I've included incidents as incident commander over one of the first terrorist attacks here in Garland, where 2 people tried to shoot up our major event center. But I've spent 20 years in community policing, the last 7 in criminal investigations, and I've been an ICA practitioner since 2006.
And certified. Okay, thank you, Patrick, and welcome. Randy Atlas, Dr. Randy Atlas from Miami. Randy, please turn your camera on and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Randy Atlas. I'm an architect and criminologist, which does not make me a criminal architect, but I design criminal justice facilities and do CPTED trainings and assessments all around the world. And I'm certified as an advanced practitioner with ICA.
Yes, and part of the certification committee as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Randy. Okay, next on my list, Pamela Daniels. Pamela, where are you?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Happy to be here.
And your background a bit, what do you do?
So I am a community organizer and a hybrid ecosystem architect. I'm sure some of you have heard about this Web3 wander that we're on. And so as we are building cohesion and community, it's very interesting how this new dynamic is affecting communities and the opportunity to understand the opportunities. I'm really excited to discuss traditional community organizing principles, as well as safe growth, Septet, and as well as creative placemaking as well. Thank you.
And you're based in where?
And I am in Newark, New Jersey.
Right. Wonderful. Well, welcome, and thank you for coming. Next on the list, I have Rene Berndt. Rene, where are you?
Here, yes. Yes, I'm very glad to be here. Welcome all from all over the world. And I live in Portland, Oregon, and I am an educational facility designer. So I'm focusing on designing of learning environment and how the physical environment can actually benefit learning and actually the 3 Cs, because in every school we want to create communication opportunities, we want to create cohesion and connections between the students. And I've been in the field for 29 years and an ICA board member and co-author of the book Safety in Schools, which we're going to release very soon, I think.
Right, and Rene's been involved with Jeremy with school design, with schools that have had mass shootings, and also lives in Portland, which has had a number of incidents over the last few years regarding protests and unrest. So we'll probably hear about that from Rene and Jeremy. So thank you, Rene, and welcome. Next on the list, I have Jeremy Rear. Jeremy, Where are you?
Right here. Hey, everybody. Welcome and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jeremy Rear. I'm an architect and associate at Milam Architects. I'm also a ICA board member. My passion, my interest, my focus interest is around places of learning and living, environments. And again, just like Rene, really focused on the 3 C's in all the work that we do. Try to bring people together and focusing on productive and safe communities.
Right. Thank you. Welcome. And finally on the list, we brought in a friend from Canada because it's one of our sister organizations. We collaborate with the Canadians on many projects, and they're starting a new chapter. Chris Anquist. Chris, hello.
Hello, Greg. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Chris. I'm a regional manager with GardaWorld. In my daily life, I live in Saskatchewan, right in the middle of Canada. If you drop your finger, it's a balmy 32 degrees Fahrenheit today, and my kids are running around in t-shirts. So, but I'm privileged to be here. I have a master's degree in global security with a focus on counterterrorism, and I'm actually the ASIS chapter chair for Saskatchewan. So I'm very involved in the security management community, and I integrate Septet in a lot of my practice in the way that I support people across the region. So glad to be here today.
Thank you. And as you can see, we are Septet United States, and we represent American sort of perspectives on things, but we're international. We're part of an international group. No group is an island. They can't work by themselves. If they do, they miss out on best practices, and they miss out on learning from other people. So we, of course, Matej is from Slovenia in Europe, and Maka is from Chile, and Chris is from Canada. So we're international as well, although this is the Septet United States chapter. So let's get started with our discussions, dialogue, debates, and arguments. We'll see where it goes. We want to do the two parts, talk about the 3 main questions, and also have some Q&A from the audience. And by the way, folks, if you want to ask questions, use the Q&A function. It's probably a little bit better than chat. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen there where it says Q&A. Click on that, ask a question. I'll do my best to get around to it as quickly as I can. And then we'll go to the second part where we ask specific questions. But to get started, let's talk about the 3 questions that we put in the poster. How do we create places safe from extremism? How might a Septet practitioner deter extremist acts? But the one I'm really interested in hearing from all of you from about is the question that says, what can we do to help those vulnerable to extremist ideas? Because although Septet is about reducing opportunities for crime in the physical environment, we deal with people. We deal with people who are clients, we deal with people in communities. And so the question, what can we do to help those who are vulnerable to extremist ideas? Is that even a Septet concern? And if it is, what can we do? Let me start with you, Patrick.
So I think the biggest thing, and I think that comes out of the 3 C's we're talking about, is engaging the community itself. When I think about extremism, I also think about sort of the general principles of where we're going with these things. The community is a key piece of this every single time. The medical adage comes up a lot in my talks about common things occurring commonly and rare things occurring rarely. And so the idea is that we use these sort of extreme cases, the fringe users, to give us some insights into possibilities, in addition to the possibilities, but also the probabilities, which is a lot of what we work on. So we're trying to create the safe spaces, make sure that we know what we're creating safe spaces for, that we're not simply going, hey, we'll lock this door, and if you're on the inside of the door, you're safe. If you're on the outside, you're not. And thinking of our spaces as existing as a much larger area. One of the challenges on extremism is that we can create safe spaces that by their very nature become problematic. That if you think of some of our targets we go after, like police departments have become targets by themselves in the last several years. For historically, they've become kind of safe places where, police officers will be here, you'll feel safer here. But at times they've actually become targets unto themselves. And so I think the idea is make sure that our places exist within the larger community, that we know that what is the purpose of this transition, as we said, to the cohesiveness of how it fits into that area. Are we communicating that properly and really moving hard on the 3 C's?
Yeah, the business about connecting to the community is always an issue, because the question arises, what community? I mean, there are many communities inside community. I mean, group identity politics nowadays talks about many communities, this community, that community, and if you side with one, you by definition don't include another. That's exclusionary. I mean, what is the police perspective on how you bring that together? Or is that even your job?
Well, I think one of the things that we have, police work has kind of evolved from the old school white hat, black hat kind of profession, where you're good or you're bad. And we actually, at least in Texas and the United States, we exist under constitutional laws that sort of protect the rights of everybody. And so we get really close to picking sides on this. So for us, a lot of it's about trying to figure out what does the law allow and make sure all the protections apply to everyone equally.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you recall when we had our discussions about this, we talked about the power of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that applies to all groups, and so that was a key for us. Pamela, how do you answer that question? What role do we have to help those who are vulnerable to extremist ideas? What's your perspective on that?
I think you started to touch on just now the importance of knowing one's rights, knowing the what's in the realm of feasibility, and we know this is an international audience, so that varies greatly. The key to that community cohesion is always going to be authentic connection and meeting people exactly where they are. And I think it's important to understand that that there's this pipeline of survival before you can really think about those esoteric, wonderful pie in the sky things that we call thrive, right? Our thrive potential. So when we're thinking about survival, and we're thinking about all the mixed messaging that people receive on a given basis, it's really important to take stock of what the core challenges are, and to address the community from a point of being a problem solver.
Yeah, it's difficult though, because many Septet practitioners are only trained in basic Septet. So they look at a problem and they go, okay, I need to put in lights, I need to trim the hedges. They don't see themselves in a broader role than that. So they end up creating, in many cases, they say homeless people, they put them over there, put a fence around it and say, we solve the problem. But that's just as exclusionary as anything. Or, you have white folks in the gated community and all the other groups outside the community, and you go, well, how's that inclusionary? I mean, the Septet practitioner is in a position of having to do both at the same time. How do they respond to that?
Well, I think it's I call it the Inreach methodology. Outreach is the method where you're really taking a large swath approach and trying to kind of corral everyone into a particular corner. And Inreach is taking the time to really have those pointed conversations. And so, obviously the safe growth approach to Septet is really getting into a particular community. You're doing that daytime audit, you're doing that nighttime audit, you're talking to families on a particular block, and you really start to understand the fabric of a community, and you listen. You don't walk into a space prescriptive. And so I think as practitioners, the more we practice and we practice listening, we will start to hear some differentiators that will be changing people's lives.
Right. And Pamela mentioned safe growth. It's a more advanced form of Septet. It's a urban neighborhood planning form of safe growth that she was originally trained in. So she actually didn't come from a basic training. She got the advanced. She got the whole thing at once. So that's what she's referring to in that safe growth. Let me turn over to Jeremy. Jeremy, how do you respond to that question?
I'm getting a call from somebody that's interrupting my audio. I hope no one else can hear it. But no, I think that both Pamela and Patrick are really kind of pointing to the importance of bringing a welcome conversation to the table, allowing people to be able to communicate their concerns. One of the things that we do as architects is try to create that safe space where people can engage with each other and talk about the issues they're having, and letting everyone know that's okay to disagree, but do it in a way that you can talk through it, and rather than try and attack one another, if you will. But I think that goes along with the communication part of the 3 C's, is really being able to open up that forum where you bring people together, talking through issues that people are having, letting people speak, because I think one of the things that a lot of people feel is that they can't talk, or they don't feel comfortable talking in front of others in fear of getting retribution. So I think it's really important to try and find that place where people can feel comfortable and welcome to be able to talk about issues.
Right, and I'm thinking about a project that you have worked on with schools, and particularly schools that suffer violence. and going in as after the fact as a practitioner and as an architect to try to help change the school or modify the school, I'm sure you must have faced extremist views of what to do. I'm sure you face people who want to arm the school, arm all the teachers, make sure that there's cops in every door, folks that want to lock the schools down, views that in many quarters are considered extremists. What do you do to help them?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a specific project that I worked on a few years ago where there were really two. There was a school shooting or a campus shooting, and there were very differentiating sides of how to respond to that event, how to rebuild what they lost, and it was really difficult conversation because people wanted to fortify, and people wanted to not fortify. They wanted to create better connections between each other, and so we had to bring people together and talk through those concerns. At some point there had to be a way to move forward. So it's a really difficult thing to do because once you start suggesting one way is better, then you're also now suddenly you're caught in a exclusionary situation. Right. So yeah, we have to really think carefully about how we talk through that and how we get consensus.
You're alluding to the fact that the new strategies for the new Septet practitioner in the 2020s go far beyond design. They get into group dynamics and group participation and collaboration and conflict resolution. Rene, you work in Portland with Jeremy. How do you respond to that question?
Yeah, I totally agree. But again, I want to remind us also that the space has a big role to play, because when we design school or learning environments or any kind of space, we want to actually design a space that promotes communication, cohesion, and connections, because space can also separate people. So actually, in my mind, actually, when I ask myself, how do you even get to extremist acts? Normally, it's a result of frustration. Like Jeremy also said, like people don't feel they're being heard anymore. They don't have a voice anymore, and then they, engage in extremist acts because, okay, now I'm being heard. Now I'm so extreme, nobody can shut me up anymore. So to avoid that, again, it's actually for me, it's a breakdown of the 3 C's in a way. That's how you get to the extremist acts. So again, listen, giving people a voice. When we go into a school meeting, even without any violent incidents, there are many different ideas about what the school should look like. And we're just facilitating the conversation, because again, when you don't allow certain people to voice their opinions, then you get these extremist acts, So in a way, it's really totally related, I think, to space. Also, and again, our spatial solutions can bring people together, with a lot of transparency. We have certain ideas, a very calming environment. We're trying to use a lot of wood, biophilic design methodologies to actually bring the blood pressure down for everybody. So people entering our schools, they say, oh, actually, I feel better. And this is a good starting point to avoid any aggression and any kind of violence. Yeah.
Yeah, Rene, you're introducing a whole bunch of new terms. With
yeah, sorry.
and that sort of thing, which is great, by the way, folks. If you want to know something about this, this is called third generation Septet. Both the first, second, and third generation Septet found their way into the new ICA school Septet guidebook, which it has some definitions in there, so you can get that information in that guidebook and in future documents. But you raise an interesting point because in the American news in the last 5 years, particularly the last 3 or 4 years, and we talked about this last year. I particularly asked Pamela some of these questions about this when we're talking about the attacks on Septet, on traditional Septet. Septet is seen as hostile architecture. Septet is seen as what's called spatial anti-blackness, that it isolates, black folks from white folks, or poor folks from rich folks, or the homeless from others. It's a separation strategy. It's seen that way by some groups. And we feel very strongly that it's not that is old Septet, but Septet has evolved since then. Randy, I suspect you might have a couple of opinions about that thought. Mute, please, Randy.
You're muted, Randy.
Unmute.
There we go. I'm so used to being muted that it's a conscious effort to unmute myself. That said, what we've heard so far from our speakers is the fact that part of what Septet does is facilitate people speaking and not shouting. and it also requires the counterpart of that, which is listening. The problem is that, like my questions were to address about how can CPTED promote cooperation and collaboration in hostile divergent target groups? Well, when I was doing work for US HUD back in the 90s in the Clinton years, we were trying to deal with drugs, gangs, sex, and rock and roll in the housing developments, and I was again facilitating design charrettes, which addresses Rene's and Jeremy's issue about design matters, but a lot of it has to do with how do we get people to listen. Well, it's hard to hold on. There we go. It's hard to imagine the people listening when they're so busy shouting at each other, which then, life today has become a proverbial shouting match. CPTED involves listening to solve community problems. But how do we demand respect, expect civility, and develop consensus if there are no consequences for your actions? Everyone is calling everyone names and judging people. You're an ist, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're an anti-vaxxist, you're a narcissist, you're a socialist, you're an anarchist. I'm an ist too, but I'm a centrist. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a realist. I'm a jurist. I believe in the rule of laws. I'm a humorist because I'm wickedly funny, and sarcastic and cynical because of the incompetence that I'm surrounded. Hold on, I want to stop share. I think it's important that we understand that there's, if there are no consequences for people engaging in criminal activity, how do we get to a centrist position that there needs to be consequences if you are stealing or you're looting or you're hurting people or burning buildings down? I also am a scientist, a survivalist, a criminologist, and a futurist. A lot of what we do in CPTED is involving looking at the future and determining how do we in fact make a difference? How in fact do we build community with our law enforcement efforts and our security efforts and our political efforts? Cancel culture doesn't change the past or affect the perception of the future. It just sticks your head in the sand and pretends that we don't know what we've done in the past, so we never have a chance to learn about the future. And
okay,
that becomes...
Hang on there a second. Just turn it. Yeah. So let me ask you this then. So that's what you think, and that's how you practice it. That's your position. But what I want to know is if you now think of yourself now as a trainer. You have a class, and this is the message you want to convey as an instructor, because you know, and I know, we've written articles and books together over the years. You and I both know that when you look to the writing in Septet, particularly some of the books written in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right up to the 2000s, the books say nothing whatsoever about centrists, about centrism. They say nothing about collaborating. They say nothing about how to work conflict resolution. They say nothing about that. So what's the Septet instructional message to students in Septet now from you?
Well, it almost goes into, there we go. In Broward County, where like the rest of the United States, where it becomes a shouting match, they've actually had to develop policies about how to be civil, about how to do with unruly adult behavior. So part of this is as trainers, we have to become sensitive and awareness enough that how do we facilitate group process? And that's not an easy skill set. It's not something you're taught in school. It's not something we're taught in CPTED. That's a skill set. In fact, I fully acknowledge the fact that I learned a lot of my collaboration skills with classes that you and I did back 15, 20 years ago, and how important it was of not just giving the presentations, but actually having the people in the class talking to each other, not at each other, and listening to each other, not at each other. And that was a really important learning lesson that I personally learned. So I acknowledge you, Greg, for expanding my architectural boundaries and parameters into listening to other people, inviting their opinions, getting up on the walls and writing down people's thoughts, and then having everyone look and acknowledge and agree in some form of consensus, if possible. What do we agree on? What do we agree to disagree on? And what's unfinished business?
And if we'd done more of that earlier on, I think we wouldn't be in the position that many Septet practitioners find themselves today, which is fighting the label of hostile architecture and all the rest of it. So I think that's true. Chris, You're sitting there quiet in Canada, wondering what you're going to say. How do you contribute to this discussion?
Well, I think it's really interesting what Randy was just talking about. As somebody who's had a background in politics, community mediation, and public engagement, and then stumbled his way into security management, I think what we're talking about here is the importance of mindset. And I think the reality is that, we have an incredible opportunity as a Septet community, unlike some of our other partners necessarily who have no space enforcing and policing the thoughts of our community members. As Septet practitioners, we also aren't doing that. However, we have an ethical obligation to facilitate that process so that everyone's voice is heard. And so what ends up happening is we have this unique opportunity to break isolation in practice and to collaborate across other disciplines to help build more resilient communities. And one thing I want to challenge in terms of mindset, because I started by saying this is about the mindset of the practitioner, is the idea of extreme. Let's be honest, folks. History changes over time, and some of the people we hold in very high regard today started as extremist views and extremist thought leaders. And so we have to remember that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, to use that age-old adage. That has to be in the back of our mind as we're doing this. However, there are some really clear lines that we can't cross as a Septet community. So let me be crystal clear right out of the gate. Clear, direct, plausible threats are the domain of law enforcement, not of Septet practitioners. And so where I think we have a great opportunity is that because we're working in communities, because we're identifying extremist thought, if we see something of concern as a practitioner, realizing these are social constructs that we need to be factoring in, we can report it early. We can report it to our local police of jurisdiction, and we're trained to identify those unusual things. We can bring people together, right? Violence is the line. Violence is the line we need to constantly be thinking about. People can have extreme thoughts, but until they're committed to that act of violence, then we have to change our approach to how we're going to deal with that. Because, a threat like that is a cry for help. We know that as a base fundamental assumption in violent threat risk assessment. So yeah, just so much opportunity here, but it has to be together. It has to be cross-functional, cross-jurisdictional, and collaborative, because we're going to see things that we have a responsibility to partner with others like Patrick on.
Okay, let me unpack that a bit. Go back a little bit here, and
sure,
because you laid quite a bit out there. Go back to the phrase where you said it's not Septet's duty to do these things. You said it's law enforcement things. What were those things again?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when we're, we can't police people's thoughts. However, when we're starting to come upon extremist idea, and I'm going to talk about this a little later in the conversation as well, when it comes to threats, when it comes to violence, when it comes to those sorts of things, that's not the role of the Septet practitioner. That is a law enforcement issue, issue to manage, and we have to know when to tap out and tap in our partners. But we can do it collaboratively and in a way that builds up and edifies that community. I'm going to talk later about the importance of looking at Septet with the lens of grievance. Are we doing Septet in a way that reduces the likelihood that somebody actually has a motivation to then act on violence in the future? That's what I'm getting at.
Let me challenge that. Let me challenge that.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring Patrick in here as our police person, representing the entire police community across the whole country. Patrick,
Sure.
So, I mean, is it really, first of all, cops are trained in Septet, so they do respond to immediate emergencies. So they do bring some of that to them. But I get asked a lot of times to do critical infrastructure protection and anti-terrorism, to do things that are very violent, or situations in which violence already exists in a crime hotspot, for example, and they want a Septet response to it. Patrick, how do you respond to this issue?
So I'm going to split the difference. Kind of thinking this one through, I actually like what Chris was saying about making sure we know where Septet lies, but I'm also not so sure that law enforcement doesn't have a big role in it. As you said, we have practitioners, a lot of them come to Septet through the law enforcement lens. And part of what I'm trying to unpack this in my head, a lot of this is going to come down to that line, that sort of called violence is the line. And one of the things that Septet does a really clear job for me of is identifying what is sort of normal behavior versus extreme behavior. And the example I use a lot, even locally in a municipality, is sidewalks. If you walk up and down sidewalks, that's common behavior. It's pretty obvious that you're obeying, both the law and the standard mores of behavior. But if you decide to cross laterally across my front yard, it may not be criminal, but it's clearly extreme. And it starts to allow us to identify those extreme behaviors. It doesn't necessarily mean a law enforcement response, but I think they tend to go together on it. And I think to carve Septet away from law enforcement could be problematic because we're going to have to see what those lines are and identify when those lines get crossed.
Yeah.
More importantly, a lot of times we'll identify violent behavior, extreme behavior by that alone, by the failure to obey those sort of mores or social norms, even beyond the law itself.
Okay, I'm going to go to Randy in a second. Randy, before I get to you, I want to go to Pamela because there's a question here from John Munn about ground rules for group behavior. I think which is what we're getting at here, and his view is that it often starts in kindergarten. How do we lose that? How do we get back to that? Pamela, you had a few answers for that. Please, Pamela.
Sorry, some good questions coming in the chat. I just wanted to send some of my thoughts in there to folks to continue the conversation. I think it's really important to remember that we can't negate someone's personal lived experience, even if we don't understand or fully or can't fully absorb what that experience may be, or even understand how a particular dynamic brought up at a particular time might apply to something. Because the act of it being brought up, it was valued by that person. And so, but it's also important to remember that disruption has been necessary because things like spatial weaponization is not a new thing. Redlining in urban communities has occurred, and there are still repercussions of that today. So I think, again, thinking about problem solving and being able to, as what was just discussed, focus on a transparent process and having a practitioner that's able to bring a group through that process to the end, recognizing that tempers may flare and tangents will occur and someone's going to get cussed out at some point, but there is a hope to bring the resolution forward, and that they're filling in these frameworks that are then adapted to the very specific dynamics on the ground, and that being done in a way that is open and transparent and viewable and honest to say that not everything everyone says in this space is all going to make the final cut, but it has a place. It's shaping the ideation and the implementation, and the things that get parking lotted are, to the best of one's ability, connected to whether it's a social safety net or another entity that might be picking up a particular project, but really just valuing all of that input and demonstrating that through the process, that all of that input was held in high regard. I believe will make people understand that the cooperative agreements, to the question you opened with, the cooperative agreements are those ground rules that if we all say we can just get through these, 5 or 10 things that we go through this process and start with, then we're all gonna walk out of this process together. And you just follow up with that, and the trust building can begin.
It's clear that the Septet practitioner can no longer rely on architecture and lighting and hedging anymore. The game has changed. It's a different game, and you need an additional skill set to what you did, because the things you mentioned, Pamela, about redlining, the practice of sectioning off one group from another, black versus white, poor versus rich. I mean, these are real things. What's going on right now with voter restrictions and vote. I mean, if you looked at that spatially, I'm sure you would get an economic prejudice and a racial prejudice that's going behind that. So is that a Septet person's strategy? I don't know. I mean, when Septet applies to large scale planning and zoning, it is. But for the average Septet practitioner, maybe not. But absolutely, the business about learning how to get folks to work together is part of the game. Francis Gulim La Sierra asks, but what do you do when groups that refuse to talk to each other? I'm going to turn to Randy. I'm going to turn to you, Pamela, then to Randy. What do you do about that?
Yeah, so I started to just ask some questions in terms of, you have to start by what are the things in common that exist? Is this a community that are currently living close to one another? Are there cultural similarities? Are there language similarities? Again, really being able to find those linkages, those strong linkages that make sure you show up properly, and you show up acknowledging that this is a disabled community or differently abled community. And so I'm going to make sure I have a translator with me, or I'm going to have someone who can translate, interpret for me. And so, just having these pointed awarenesses, again, let people know you're being intentional, and that's the foundation of authenticity. And so a lot of times people don't want to get involved in processes because they don't think it will be fruitful. But when you start to lay certain actions down and you do them, and then they see that, you'll be surprised the momentum that you begin to pick up, even when you thought that there was just nothing here for us to start with.
Right, right. And just a reminder to our panelists, just wave at me so I know you want to talk, or cross-talk if you want to talk to Pamela and so forth. Okay, Chris, I'll get to you in a second. Randy, I wanted to bring you in here.
I want to address the unfinished business about what is police's role in Septet and in community, building a sense of community. I just experienced a couple weeks ago where I was asked to participate as a Septet expert in the development of a Septet ordinance for parks and trails in Maryland. And I was forbidden, I want you to hear the word, the F word, I was forbidden to even address police's role in maintaining security at the parks and the trails and stuff. It's like, are you kidding me? And by the way, and you can't talk about mechanical surveillance or videos because people, the black community there doesn't want to be watched and they don't trust the police. And so Septet has to be the lighting and the landscaping and the signage and the wayfinding and all the warm fuzzy things. And I'm going, yeah, but who enforces the people that are breaking into the cars at the trailhead? Who enforces the security in the parks when people are over drinking or acting stupid? And they wanted no part of it. I mean, I had 2 minutes to present before their senator, whoever, and I literally I had my speech edited that I couldn't even address the police played a role in developing a sense of community and a sense of consensus because there was just so much trust. And addressing Pamela's concern about how do we find the things in common, you know, I'm used to involving and having police participate and having the police interact with the other agencies and the other community groups and the other activist groups and the other key resource persons. And I'm feeling this pushback now that I've never felt, that the police are like swipe to the left.
Okay, Pamela, before I go to Chris, Pamela or Patrick, what do you say to that?
Go ahead, Pamela.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the dynamics on the ground are always shifting, and police departments and units are at different levels of maturity in this, right? So partnership alignment certainly is vital, and you're sometimes at the mercy of the exposure of your key partners. But I think it's important to connect with champions and have ambassadors and people on the ground that are already respected to help you get those initial wins, to be those initial voices, to assist with the knocking on the door, and to ensure that there's local leadership and local and resident-based decision making. And there are simple ways of doing that, and there are really complex ways. But again, depending on the maturity level, you can really earn some easy wins, early wins, not easy, but early wins by having key partners that are from the community, that are already addressed some of those complaints. Sometimes the loudest voice that is really angry and upset are the person who's going to hang out with you after the meeting and give you some really important intel that will help you shape your entire strategy. But if you get discouraged by that initial early on reaction that's based on a lot of factors that probably don't have anything to do with you personally, then you'll cut yourself off before you get a chance to do some transformative things.
And Pamela, what you do so well, and you and I work together in New Jersey on this, so what you do so well is you bring the strategies of community building, the strategies of community engagement. It's not just a philosophical, we don't offer the 3 C's as a general philosophy. We offer them as specific tactics that a Septet person can do. So we need to learn these. These are part of our new language. These are part of our new toolbox. You don't just guess this stuff. You don't go make a presentation and hope it's going to happen all for the better. Those of you who know the history of Septet back in the 70s and 80s, you know the work of Oscar Newman and his work in the public housing in the 50s and 60s. You may not know, however, when he got into the 70s, he started to do the sectioning off of neighborhoods, breaking neighborhoods into smaller neighborhoods in places like Dayton Oaks in Dayton, Ohio, that he had huge conflict, that he went into situations where the residents railed against him. He had to be escorted out of a meeting by police at one time because he was not able to do this community engagement strategy. This is the new language of Septet. That's my position on this one. Patrick, I cut you off, sorry.
No. So I'm going to kind of split the difference again on this one. I actually love what Randy said, because this has happened to me quite a few times, where it's the, hey, come do the Septet thing, as if it's sort of a lever or some sort of tool that we're going to apply to a situation, and then be immediately applied to going, hey, I know you brought a hammer, but we don't have any nails. But go ahead and say you showed up and did it and move on. And I know the challenge has always been people not knowing what we're offering as a practitioner, and believing that we're simply going to dust it off, and almost like an inspection where, hey, let's make sure the doors work and make sure that the locks will lock and things like that, which is a totally different mindset. We've transitioned as much as we can about engaging who are going to be the users of this community. And the challenge for us has been, I think Randy described it best, is sometimes police departments or law enforcement can become the extremist views of it. That we come in with the enforcement of the laws that people may not want to have enforced.
Well, let me push you on that a bit. We got a question from the audience that says, yes, some groups and individuals may refuse to participate with a facilitator. Getting back to social norms, is this a community? Is this a part of community leadership? And do the police have a role in community leadership? And your question that I'm going to go to the second set here of questions. Your question that you wanted was for police professionals. Does Septet play a role in addressing extremism? Should extremism be a consideration when defining communities as part of safety and security design? So let me jumble all that and throw that at you.
So yes, is that a good enough answer? So the reality is on this, that Septet actually does give a really nice lens. Like I said, I've described it before as people approach Septet as a tool, something you bring out of the, out of your toolbox and you apply to some sort of development or design. And to me, it's much more of a lens of trying to identify what are you building it for and who are you building it for. One of the challenges we had recently was building a skate park, a skateboarding facility in the city. And it immediately divided part of the community to a group that thought this will be a really cool thing for kids, and a group that thought it would be a haven for drug activity, gang activity, whatever group you want to put on that side. And we actually met with everyone, including the participants that would be involved in using it, and try to identify what's the use going to be. And the challenge is going to be, once those individuals stop using it, it becomes any other unclaimed space, old school Septet thing of I'm going to have to lock it and secure it and put all my mechanical things out there. But the sort of agreement we made was to really support the use of it the way it was intended. The idea of building cohesion around the location, communicating with all the users. And so from the police department standpoint, when we roll up there, we're not going to roll up with a red and blue and, flash the siren, hey, you skateboarders go home, because they're the ones who are actually using it. And it's more of, okay, what is the need they have? And so it wasn't a place to smoke marijuana. It wasn't a place to do graffiti or hang out. It's a place to skateboard. And I kind of put in the chat about this sort of idea of timeless needs, and the needs the kids have is we need a place to go skateboard that's safe. We can hang out and do those activities. I mean,
I think you're onto something. I think that's the key. The key is, regardless of what the views are, it's the behavior that matters to the Septet practitioner. It's what the behavior is, and we lay the agreed sort of social norms of what the behavior we want here, what everybody wants as an agreed behavior, and we stay with that. And I think that's probably part of your thing, Chris, your question was, which relates to this, I'm going to ask you this: what does it practically look like for a Septet practitioner to create an environment that removes why someone would be extremist? So how would you respond to this?
Yeah, I think the reality is we have to be talking about what a radicalization process actually looks like with those, when Septet is fully functioning, we have those safety groups that are embedded in community associations. We need to educate. We need to talk about what that looks like. Particularly, we need to engage in whole community strategies, not just the members that we understand or are comfortable working with. And we need to focus in our strategies on identifying who is isolated, who is vulnerable. We need to bring them into that safety audit process because we recognize that there's a greater risk of them being radicalized, and we want to connect with them authentically. The second thing we've got to look at is that lens of grievance that I mentioned previously. are we doing more harm than good with the strategies that we're bringing forward? Because I'm going to throw another jargon piece here: empty vessels. Okay, so these are people who are not connected with healthy, mature individuals, and they're searching for things to identify with. These are often people who hold extremist views. Disconnected people will fill themselves with whatever is right. coming their way. And so I would suggest the role of the Septet practitioner is to be a part of a community of practice that makes sure that those empty vessels never empty in the first place. Yeah. That's what we're in this for. And actually, listening to the comments about, expectations, it's really fascinating because, if you look at what the International Association of Public Participation is doing, they've set out a spectrum. And a big part of what they advocate for, and I know the architects on the call are all smiling now that I've talked about the IAP2 spectrum, but they say to be very clear in what the promise is to the community on the level of change that they can impact. Yeah. And so we have to be crystal clear, and that's part of the pre-process. When you're talking about law enforcement architects and you can do this, but you can't do that. Setting a reasonable level of engagement right out of the gate that everyone can agree on and being firm to that is critical to our success. And so I'll put a link in the chat for people who are interested in IAP2. But I think there's a blend of practice there that's really critical to dealing with some of this.
Well, Chris, you also mentioned a term that folks may not recognize which we call the safety audit, because most Septet folks do Septet surveys or site visits, but they don't do an audit like we do in Safe Growth. When safety audit, it developed in Toronto and adopted by the United Nations Habitat Group. Look it up online. It's a powerful strategy. The safety audit is a collaborative auditing tool that you do as a group, and you have diverse groups in the auditing group that goes out at nighttime and collects data on a protocol. And we use our website, we use our phones for that. And it's the collaboration during the group auditing process itself where you start to break down some of these views. So it's the auditing process that matters most. So I think that's key. Randy, I bet you have things to say. I'm particularly interested in Barry Davison just asked this question. What specific advice would you give those outside law enforcement to build these bridges in a non-extremist environment? And your question was, how specifically can Septet implementation be centrist in an environment of extremism? So I think it's the same question. So how do you respond, Randy?
Well, it goes back into how do we develop a sense of community? How do we develop consensus? How do we develop a sense of place that different groups buy into? And this has been numerous groups from the Project for Public Spaces and the AIA and different sociology groups and different community efforts. It's about how do we get some consensus and how do we get people's participation? How do we draw a diverse population, promote a sense of comfort, promote accessibility, develop community identity, make it my neighborhood? Well, that's fine until people fly in, like, I live in South Florida and people come into Miami Beach over spring break and whatever, and then just trash it because we're a cheap jet fare to get here and cheap hotel rates. And then people and the drinking laws are open till 5 o'clock in the morning. The bars are open till 5 o'clock in the morning, and people go berserk because they've been, caged up for 2.5 years. So, but ultimately, the answer to your question is it's about developing a sense of community and a sense of place. And I think that's the answer about how we get people to participate in that process, to ask the right questions, to at least ask their opinion, to at least give them the courtesy of listening, or even if it's pretending they're listening, at least make the effort. And of course, engaging in the ground rules of respect and civility, which seems to be a lost commodity these days, in my opinion.
It's a risky proposition, though, because many Septet practitioners don't learn anything about this. And, we've taken special care in the ICA to make sure we have a certification program with a code of ethics that lays these strategies out. But not all folks get that training. So they may not even see this as their job. They may see their job simply as doing some target hardening, some situation prevention, and some locks and lights and walk away, in which case we do end up back with reinforcing extremist views or doing nothing about extremist views at all. So it's very much, I think, a philosophy and a training issue and a writing issue. And I think we in Septet USA and the ICA in general, our job is to start to create a program to help folks to learn how these things actually work. Pamela, bridge building, techniques. What techniques can you offer our audience?
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue, this last part of the conversation around why I do believe that creative placemaking is an excellent lens to work hand in hand with the safe growth philosophy and approach to community cohesion, because even though we're dealing with something as extreme as extremism, people are more likely to coalesce around something joyous and something wonderful than something horrible and terrifying.
Especially food.
Terrifying is great for shock
It's
value,
sports.
but it's not sustainable. So when you're leading with the lens of, okay, what can be activated here, or what is the intervention that's needed, and you're asking people to create, to utilize art to solve these problems, to address injustice, then you're putting them in a completely different mentality from what they entered that scenario with. And then your feedback from them is just going to be something beautiful, because you're going to have something that's coming from the wellspring of life. So
yeah. And I hear this often, and that basically is the second generation strategy called culture, about getting folks to engage over music and food and things that they are joyful, And I hear a lot of folks saying, well, if you do good Septet, you do second generation Septet. What a lot of nonsense. That was never part of any Septet book up until 1998. And so what you're describing is exactly the path for moving forward in bringing people together in a non-threatening environment, just to learn how to talk to each other on a very basic way. So that's such a great point. Rene, your question, in your work in school communities, how do you guide your clients in the process of addressing Septet, particularly extremist issues?
Yes, so I think it just goes a little bit into the question, what are the tools actually? And so one of the tools we're using is actually where we allow everybody, first of all, I think this kind of agreement that we allow everybody to have a time, a time to voice their voices and opinions, and also state their goals. Because if everybody knows that there's a time for them, allocated, they're not going to interrupt anybody. It's like, the screaming and shouting happens when you say, oh, don't talk about this, or you're not allowed to talk in this meeting, That's when people have to shout, because otherwise they're not being heard. So first we establish this, that everybody who's here in this room will be respected to voice their opinion. And then, because sometimes, again, there's maybe different ideas about measures, but the goals are actually very similar. And so focusing, again, what people have in common. They want, they want the kids to learn. They want the kids to be safe. There's a lot of common ground, actually. And again, and this is totally contrary to those identity policies where everybody's in their own little mini group who's, the enemy of everybody else, to actually bring us all back together. And that's the biggest problem, I think. That has led to the extremism in recent times, that everybody's in their own little corner and feels alone and under threat. No, actually, there's this great video by somebody from Norway or Sweden, where there's really diverse group of, very diverse looking people, from all sorts of backgrounds, and they're asking certain questions, and how the group comes together, like, who's, whatever, maybe even was abused as a child, or who has, lost a brother recently, or whatever. People have much more in common when we remember that we're all human beings. So anyway, finding these goals, that are actually uniting people, and that is one of the strategies we use. And then we compare them and discuss them, because if only one person out of 25 had a specific goal, and the other one's like, well, there's a discussion around it, and maybe this goal will be dropped or reduced, in immediacy, and that's how we actually rally people around and finding maybe the top 3 objectives for any project, because we never have the funding, and we're dealing with public schools, to really address everything. So anyway, that's one of the themes,
Okay, so we're running out of time here. I'm afraid to say I'm getting nasty notes from our moderator saying, "Get going." We have one, Rene, I still want to talk, or Jeremy, I still want to ask you your final question, but I noticed that there's a question from Gabriel Sturm that says, how do you handle issues with people?
I'd like to answer that.
So, of entitlement. Did you want to talk to that at all?
Yeah, I actually did want to talk about that. I think that was a really great question. In my experience, in my organizing practice, I think it has been beneficial to look at the professional development, community development, capacity development of the community, of your leadership, partners that you hope to work with you on a particular project, that investing in specialized or niche engagement so that you address some of the underlining isms, shall we say, is absolutely important and more prevalent and much very much so needed. And so building that into your process I think is really the greatest solution to that. That it's not something you just skip over or just acknowledge by saying, but you bring in a facilitated approach to actually address that and bring people up so that your team structure is then empowered to then take things a step further and use that opportunity to be vulnerable, build trust, and again, demonstrate authenticity.
Right. Okay. And final words to Jeremy, strategies, methodologies. What do you offer?
Yeah, I think my comment was actually going back to Rene's, very similar. In fact, Rene and I work together, so we know how we work. But I think he's right. Finding that place where people can voice their concerns and feel like they can say something, whether it's negative or positive. But I think what's really interesting is that these, we keep talking about finding ways people can talk. And this is really about the community agreements, right? That we're all and they're worded differently in many different cases, but it really is about, establishing the rules of engagement, how we talk to each other, how we listen to each other, how we resolve, how we get to be productive in the time that we have. But I think the important thing is to allow the people who are participating to listen, because listening, we need to listen, but the people in the meeting who are actively participating need to listen, because that might allow them to say, oh, you know what? The person I thought who was really bad really does have a similar concern that I do. Yep. And that, okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah. And so I think community agreements, collaborative safety audits, community engagement tactics, these are the specific things we need to start working on. We in the Septet United States, we're going to be doing this. This is what we discussed. We're going to have a workshop probably at the end of the year, next spring. So please join us. We have these discussions all the time. We always disagree. We always have fun, but we're a family. We're figuring it out as we go along. So please join us. You join us by joining the ICA. And having said that, I will end our first webcast. Thank you very much, everybody. Great job. And I will turn the floor over to Matea to close us out. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Greg, and thank you to all the panelists. This was a very stimulating discussion. And I think there are so many different directions that we could actually take this discussion into. And I think it actually will necessitate further, maybe webcast or some different forums to discuss some of those issues. So I'm looking forward to more discussions in the future. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, of course, to everyone who attended today's webcast. We will have more in the future by the Septet United States group. I would like to leave you with a few notices. So please do bear with me as I share the screen. So the first thing I would like to mention is that we invite you to complete the survey. So you will also receive a certificate of attendance by completing the survey. So please do use the QR code on the screen or the link that I have also provided in the chat. And you will also receive it upon receiving a recording of this webcast. So please do complete so that we can improve the experience in the future. Also, I already mentioned membership. Greg did as well. So please join us if you're not yet a member. Anyone can join. There are no requirements. So you just complete the sign up sheet on the website and you contribute a membership fee. So anyone can join. Let us know if you have any questions. We also invite you to look at our certification program. So we offer a certification program for individuals, for professionals, as well as course accreditation program for course developers or instructors. So do read more about those programs and again, contact us with any questions. And finally, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on all the major platforms, so do join the discussion and become part of our Septet family. So I want to thank you everyone again, and stay safe, be well, stay healthy, and we shall see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.